So, there's a lot of questions about ethical and privacy. Can we start with the concept itself changed of privacy in the modern world, and what is ethical privacy?
Sure. The first thing I'm going to do is just test the technology and make sure that you can all hear. It's okay? Okay, let me know. I think that notions of privacy have changed quite a lot. And if we think about it, so much of that is even in our lifetime, it's changed so much.
Yeah.
So I don't want to embarrass anyone by trying to guess anyone's age. But even since I was a child, if you had said to me then, one day you're going to have a telephone that isn't just a telephone, it's also a computer and a camera and a recorder for audio and a video camera, and it will have sensing technology in it that can track you everywhere you go. And all of that information about you and your friends and your work, all of it that you're putting onto your phone, is going to be shared with companies that you will never meet, called third-party data brokers, potentially with governments, your own government, but also maybe foreign governments, etc. That would have been quite extreme. And then if you had said, there's also going to be this device called an Amazon Alexa or a Google Nest that if you want, you could keep in your house, and it will listen all the time. But you can also talk to it and order your groceries through it. But it might also be recording you. You would think that's crazy, right? Like to tell somebody 30 years ago, you might put a listening device in your house by choice, people would have said, no way. But now we do it because it's convenient.
It's the progress, and this is the price of the progress.
The price of progress, that's a great phrase. I think we may change our minds. So just as we changed our minds from 20 to 30 years ago to go, absolutely not, and now we're here today going, yeah, this is progress, it's entirely possible that attitudes could change again, and people might say, you know what, that's not worth it. So it's the question of technology ethics is always in play. You never would just make the decision once and then you can forget about it. It's something that as the technology changes and as society changes, we have to ask ourselves over and over, is it worth it? Is this good? Is this bad? What is the balance?
Is it worth it? But can we now let it go? Especially that when you go log in or download an application, for example, in your phone or something, you don't have a choice. You need to accept to get to the application or to the service itself.
Yeah. So I don't think it's too late, and we have to say there's nothing we can do about it, because I think it's possible through several different ways to change technology and make it better. So the first might be lobbying your lawmakers and saying we want to have regulation. And if you're in business, you might have more power to do that than if you're an ordinary citizen, and it depends on what country you're in. It also depends, though, if you're a company making the technology, if you spot an opportunity and see that privacy could actually be profitable, right? So if you create technology that protects people's data and becomes more private, quite a lot of people might buy that. So now suddenly you've changed, privacy is not a burden, privacy is an asset, and it's attractive. You can also, as a consumer, you're right, we were discussing beforehand that all of us have to just always click, I agree, whenever we go online, because if you want to access the website, you have to, right? It's not really a choice, and that's a bit cheeky. So the question really is, how do we move beyond that and get real consent, real information, and real choice? And again, that might be down to, there's a lot of young people who are here today and people who are building the technology. That can also be down to the technologists themselves going, how do we actually have a better relationship with our users, business, consumers, government, to give them more choice, which technologists usually love, right? Because we want to build technology that works for everyone, but we also love to build technology that's customizable, that's personal, because what you want from your technology might be different than from what you want. So to have those features, if privacy becomes a feature that people want, the market could shift. So it's not over. It's all still in play.
Yeah, but who decides? Even the red lines, who draws them? I'm gonna borrow your expressions in your book, Technology is Not Neutral. Who draws the red lines? Who decides that the red lines were crossed?
Yeah. So it's a great question, and we see this a lot in technology where people create something and they launch it, and then we see what happens. It's like science, right? And then if it's really bad, only then do we rush in and quickly clean it up, put some regulation in place, put some laws in place. So it's always, there's a lag. The technology used to come first, and then maybe you would clean it up afterwards if it was harmful. So the question is, can we flip that equation around and create a technology process where it isn't just the technologists drawing the line or the business people drawing the line, but actually making it much more democratic? And by that I mean things like, you could have people at the very beginning of a creation of a technology who are invited in to help think through the risks and the opportunities. So let's pick an example that we could probably all agree on, which is technology that children use. Children are really vulnerable with technology, right? They don't always understand when they're putting their data online what's at stake. They don't really understand what privacy means because they're children. And they also don't know that who they're interacting with online might not be who they claim to be. And if you're a parent, or if you're a teacher or a grandparent, you're worried about that. So how do we design technology that's going to respect and protect children's privacy? You would, for instance, want to involve parents, and you might even want to involve children in the design phase at the very beginning, but also all the way through. So just today, TikTok was announcing that there are children under the age of 13, which is the age in theory for consent with kids and data protection law. And they're influencers, and they're using this technology and they're putting it out onto the internet, which is a bit weird if you think about it, because they're technically underage. In theory, they shouldn't be on TikTok at all. So how did that happen? Is TikTok working with parents and teachers and people who look at data protection for children and children themselves to explain the risks and to protect them? So it's a really good example just right there that you wouldn't necessarily look at a little kid or look at their mom or their grandparents and say, you could be involved in creating technology, but in fact, they're essential. They have to be.
But who should enforce companies to do so? To enforce the law? What is the law and the governments in this equation? Are governments in the digital era outplaced?
So law is definitely one way that you could try to do something like this, but I think there's also the risk that everybody gets very worried that if we legislate and regulate too much that we destroy innovation, so that's a concern. There's also the fact, though, that there are many laws and regulations already on the statute books that don't get enforced, and regulators around the world, it's a common complaint that they feel they don't have enough resources to even enforce regulation. So although those are good paths to explore, I would also actually say that I think the advantage is more one of money. So if technology companies can say to the market, we are trying to be more ethical. We want children to be able to use our product safely. We want mom and dad, we want parents and teachers and school, because that's such a big problem for where technology abuse can happen is in school. We want them to feel safe, and so we're involving them. Nobody's making us do it. It's not a legal requirement. We're doing it because we like it. We think it's the right thing to do. And we want to have those relationships with our users and with their parents to help protect them. Then suddenly you've changed the conversation and you are leading the way. So there's that whole thing of, do you only do something that's good when it's a legal requirement? Or do you do something that's good because you want to be that kind of company or you want to be that kind of country? And it doesn't have to be the example I've been using here is with children, but it could be just as much so for the environment and climate change. It's something that will affect all of us. If we wait for governments or lawmakers and regulators to tell us what to do, that might not work. It might be too late. We can certainly welcome their intervention, but I think there's so much we can do that's faster. Business can often act much faster, and business responds to customers, and all of us are customers.
It should be regulations organizing this technology work or companies in general. But the problem is which laws, in which country, or international, or under the UN.
Yeah. I wish I had an easy answer for you. I think that part of the problem that we can all probably agree on here in this room is that so many of the big technology companies that we are all having to interact with come from a few countries. And yet the whole world has to live with their effects, right? So that's specifically with social media companies, and I'm sure I don't need to name their names, we can all imagine them. But there are also many other technology companies that are not as well known, but that have a huge global impact on how things are today and in the future. And that's why so many of these companies have government relations departments, and that's involved in lobbying lawmakers, but it's also their PR campaigns, their communications departments. So again, the question becomes, how do you link the government activities of those companies to the public? Because otherwise what can happen is, imagine big oil companies or nuclear power plants, things that are really important. That's often happening as a dialogue between companies and governments, but civil society doesn't have a voice. They're not coming to talk about, do you want to have this in your neighborhood, right? There's not a lot of dialogue in that way. I think technology companies have an opportunity, because they're so involved in people's lives, to broaden that conversation so much more and make it where it's not just between governments and companies or even just a handful of governments. Most people on Earth are not going to the World Economic Forum, or they're not lucky enough to get to come here to the World Government Summit. So we all have these conversations here. How do we then take it out to the people who are using the tech?
We were talking before this session, and you mentioned, for example, the Germany and EU example of facing this data exchange from European nationalists to the US. Can we build in this experience? Is it effective?
Yeah. So the example that I was giving, that if you live in the European Union, you benefit from a law that's called the GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulation. And that came into effect in 2018, and it protects the data of anyone living in the EU. Germany is a member of the European Union, so it benefits from that, but it also has its own national requirements. So because of its history with the Second World War, Germany has very specific laws about hate speech, which are different than from the United States, where I'm originally from, where we have something called the First Amendment, which makes it very difficult to regulate hate speech because we want to have freedom of expression. It's two good values with good intentions that are completely in conflict. They don't work. And because Facebook is based in the United States, it often likes to go with the US version of freedom of speech. But in Germany, it can't, because hate speech and denying the Holocaust in the Second World War is discussed in law. So they have to abide by German law in Germany, which means that Facebook has literally a different physical cost. It has higher staff. It has to pay more money to do content moderation in Germany alone. It doesn't apply to the rest of the EU.
So they have the ability.
They do have the ability, which illustrates the point that if Facebook wanted to be better at removing misinformation or disinformation or violence, it could. And this isn't to criticize Facebook, because I know they're trying very hard. They have a very difficult job because they have however many billion people using their site. That's a lot of content moderation, and artificial intelligence can't do it all. It can't even do most of it. So it can be done. The question is just the will. And that, again, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that will inspire the people here to say, Facebook does respect national laws. So if you don't like how they're doing business in your country, you have power to change that conversation. They don't have all the power. We do.
Mm-hmm. But don't you think sometimes, because we saw some Congress sessions trying to in US trying to understand. So my question is, do lawmakers understand the progress in tech or digital world?
I would like to be fair to lawmakers and say that I think they are trying. I think specifically the US Congress, when they initially held some of their first hearings with Facebook, it was quite scary. They didn't know a lot. They got a lot of criticism for that. To their credit, when they had to interview Facebook again, you could tell that a lot of the congressmen and women and senators had done their research and gotten more information, and they had much better questions. I think the European Union, their lawmakers in the European Parliament, are very well researched and informed. In the United Kingdom, where I now live, in London, we would love to host Mark Zuckerberg in the Houses of Parliament to ask him questions, but he refuses to come, which is maybe interesting. Perhaps he's scared of our researchers, who are very good. So lawmakers, I think, are coming up to speed. Part of the problem is, if you're a lawmaker, you have so many other responsibilities. You're dealing with COVID, pensions, education, jobs, trade, tax, and it can feel like technology is just one more thing on your list. And I guess what I would say here to anybody who's thinking about this is, it's actually the opposite. Technology is going to be part of every single thing that government does. So you must have people who are advising you about political risk and technology, ethics and technology, the future of regulation or trade, or where you're vulnerable in your supply chain. Technology has become an issue of national security, and I don't just mean that in like a terrorism sense. It's an issue where you need to make sure that you're leading and aware of all of the standards, because it's not just for now, it's for your country's future. So I think I think all lawmakers are waking up to that, and they're at different stages in terms of how they're dealing with it.
It's very critical. But
yeah.
How can we reach ethics in the digital or tech world? Do we need an oath?
We maybe do need an oath. So we were talking about this, and I mentioned it in my book. In medicine, at least in the Western world, and not all doctors do this, but it's something that they can do if they want. There's something called the Hippocratic Oath. And this is where a doctor, when they graduate and they become a doctor, will swear this oath, and it's to first do no harm. And there are principles of medical ethics that they sign up to, which is about, what is the best duty of care that a doctor has to their patient, right? Because doctors are literally dealing with life and death, but they're also dealing with quality of life. So you have to decide, and you work with the patient, and it's viewed holistically. There's an argument that technologists also could take something like a Hippocratic Oath, so that when they are graduating from university or whatever training programs they're doing, they take ethics as part of their training, so that they are trained to think about the consequences of what they're building. So if you're going to build a nuclear power plant, you also need to be thinking about nuclear weapons. If you're going to be working in artificial intelligence and you're thinking, this is amazing, we could use AI to discover new medicine, that's wonderful for humanity. But you're also thinking, we could use AI to build some of the most terrifying weapons humanity has ever seen. So if you think about the average person when they come out of university, they're 22 years old? That's a lot of power for someone so young to get to work on technology. And if you only train them in mathematics and science and engineering, and you don't train them in ethics as well, there's a risk there. So the Hippocratic Oath that we have already established in medicine is a concept that we could think about applying to how we train people who work in technology too, so that they think about children, or they think about the planet, or they think about healthcare in a more holistic way for tech, or even for government.
Dr. Stephanie Hare, author and tech researcher, thank you so much.
Thank you.
For being with us and for this information, of course. Thank you so much for being with us.
Shukran.